1 year into his presidency, President Lee Jae-myung says the coming year will be about turning achievements into meaningful improvements in people's everyday lives. Formal talks are now underway between Seoul and Washington on nuclear-powered submarines and civil nuclear issues, paving the way for expanded cooperation in security and energy. Campaigning for Korea's June 3rd local elections and parliamentary by-elections officially comes to an end at midnight tonight, as candidates make their final appeals in a race seen as a key test of public sentiment toward the government. Ahead of the first anniversary of his inauguration, President Lee Jae-myung has vowed to bring about substantive changes to improve people's livelihoods. He'll focus on the economy and high-tech industries. Our Yoon Jung-min starts us off.
The cabinet opened its weekly meeting by paying a silent tribute ahead of Memorial Day this weekend. This week also coincides with the first anniversary of the Lee Jae-myung administration, and the president has hinted at his vision for the second year.
임기 2년 차부터는 지금까지의 정책 성과를 바탕으로 국민 삶의 실질적 변화를 더 크게 만들고
He promised to ensure that the benefits of increased exports can spill over into smaller firms and into helping the vulnerable, while bolstering infrastructure for AI, energy transition, balanced regional growth, and cutting-edge technologies.
반도체뿐 아니라 로봇, 방산 등 여타 첨단 산업 육성에도 박차를 가해서 글로벌 초격차 경제 강국의 문도 활짝 열어가야겠습니다.
He added that South Korea will enhance its role as a responsible global player when it comes to diplomacy and security, and promised to garner more support from the public for his job approval at the end of his term compared to the beginning.
앞으로 4년 동안 국정 속도를 2배로 높이고 정성을 다하면 남은 시간은 비록 4년이지만 8년과 같이 있을 수 있다.
The president reiterated he would employ preemptive measures to tamp down higher prices triggered by the unrest in the Middle East, such as releasing reserve portions of certain items, expanding discounts, and readjusting import quota tariffs. He also pointed out cases where too heavy a debt burden was imposed on the vulnerable, urging for a proper debt resettlement system for them. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
Also today, President Lee Jae-myung met a group of African foreign ministers for greater cooperation. Inviting them to the Blue House today, he said his government has a special interest in cooperating with African nations, noting their great growth potential. He also took note of the Korea-Africa Summit set to be held in 2029 and said he hoped to make it a regular event. Seoul hosted a South Korea-Africa Business Forum and Foreign Ministers meeting this week. Senior delegations from Seoul and Washington are meeting here in the capital beginning today for follow-up talks on security commitments laid out in their joint fact sheet as the two allies move to advance key agreements reached by their leaders. Our foreign affairs correspondent Oh Soo-young has the details.
Korea and the United States have launched formal talks on Seoul's push to develop nuclear-powered submarines and civil nuclear cooperation, opening a new phase in the bilateral alliance. The first round of consultations began at Seoul's Foreign Ministry Tuesday morning, with sessions to continue into Wednesday. The highly anticipated talks are aimed at implementing security commitments outlined in a joint fact sheet last year. The bilateral document reflects key understandings reached between Presidents Lee Jae-myung and Donald Trump on Korea's push to build conventionally armed nuclear-powered submarines and secure greater rights for uranium enrichment and spent fuel reprocessing.
Starting with this launch meeting, the government will pursue diplomatic efforts to ensure the leaders' security agreements are implemented substantively. Our cooperation and partnership in the nuclear sector will help deepen and expand the alliance.
For Korea, this could unlock new industrial opportunities while strengthening defense capabilities amid North Korea's growing nuclear and missile threats. For the US, Korean investment and expertise could help boost US industrial competence and jobs in areas such as shipbuilding, nuclear supply chains, and defense production. However, under a civil nuclear cooperation agreement with Washington, Korea cannot freely enrich uranium or reprocess spent nuclear fuel without US consent.
Enrichment and reprocessing rights are tied to revising the Nuclear Cooperation Agreement, and this is purely for civilian and commercial purposes. Nuclear-powered submarines, however, involve the military use of nuclear energy. Under U.S. law, that requires a separate agreement, so there'll continue to be close bilateral discussions on how to proceed.
A foreign ministry official said both sides agreed to move directly into working-level negotiations rather than treat the launch meeting as a ceremonial opening session. In fact, the various agenda items are being handled through a single channel for now, bringing together officials from national security, foreign affairs, defense, energy and nuclear agencies. The launch session was co-chaired by First Vice Foreign Minister Park Yun-ju and US Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs Alison Hooker, who is leading the US delegation. Posting on X, Hooker reflected on the more than 70 years of the alliance, saying she looked forward to further deepening and modernizing bilateral cooperation and expecting continued progress. On top of the consultations, Hooker is also meeting with Foreign Minister Cho Hyun and other senior officials to discuss broader alliance issues and developments on the Korean Peninsula. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
U.S. Undersecretary Alison Hooker also met with National Security Advisor Wi Sung-lac today here in Seoul. In a separate meeting, the officials welcomed the opening of consultations to implement follow-ups to the Allies' joint fact sheet on the security front and hope to accelerate related talks during the two-day consultations. They also reaffirmed the South Korea-U.S. alliance as a linchpin for peace and prosperity in the region and agreed to continue close cooperation on regional and global issues, including the Middle East. With the official campaign period entering its final stretch, candidates nationwide are set to conclude their 13-day campaign race on Tuesday. And as our mayoral hopefuls spent the day making their final appeals to voters ahead of the midnight campaign deadline. Our political correspondent An Sung-jin has this report.
With less than 24 hours remaining before voters head to the polls, Seoul mayoral candidates spent Tuesday crisscrossing the city in a final bid to win support. The ruling Democratic Party candidate Chung Won-ho launched his final day campaigning under the slogan, "A New Beginning for Seoul." Focusing on everyday concerns, the DP candidate highlighted policies aimed at easing living costs and improving access to public services. He also promised clear communication with the people as he wrapped up his last day.
At the end, it's about being truthful and focusing on doing my best rather than any other strategy. I guess this is my best strategy.
Chung said voters should support a city government that delivers real change in people's daily lives as he reaffirmed his signature pledge to create a 30-minute city commute through bus route restructuring and connecting subway and bus networks. He also framed the election as an opportunity to strengthen the Lee Jae-myung administration and accelerate broader changes across Seoul. Both the ruling and main opposition parties point to Seoul as one of the key battlegrounds, as the capital holds a significant amount of swing voters to decide the race. Meanwhile, the main opposition People Power Party's incumbent Mayor Oh Se-hoon kicked off what he called a make-or-break final 24-hour campaign. Throughout the day, Oh criticized the Lee administration's housing policies while emphasizing his commitment to improving transportation and mobility across the city.
It's not about the conservatives or the progressives. I pledge to listen to the citizens and uphold freedom and the law of this country.
Housing affordability, property prices, and stabilizing the cost of living remain central themes of the PPP candidate's campaign. Presenting himself as a seasoned leader and drawing on his experience as mayor, he pledged to tackle challenges in housing, transportation, the economy, and public safety. He also vowed to raise Seoul's global standing and improve the quality of life, economic competitiveness, and the city's overall appeal. As campaigning enters its final hours, the race is set for a closely watched finish, as Seoul residents prepare to decide who will lead the city for the next term. An Sung-jin, Arirang News.
Korea heads to the polls tomorrow for the June 3rd nationwide local elections, the first major vote since President Lee Jae-myung took office. Now, with a record-breaking early voter turnout and a high-stakes battle for Seoul City Hall, all eyes are on what the results could signal about the new government's political standing. For more, we are joined by our political correspondent Moon Hae-ryun tonight. Welcome back, Hae-ryun.
Good evening, Tammy.
So, Hae-ryun, walk us through tomorrow's election day deadline. Timeline first.
Right. So tomorrow the polls will start opening at 6 a.m. and it'll close at 6 p.m. across more than 14,000 voting stations nationwide. And once polls close, results start coming in fast. Exit polls from the three major broadcasters, KBS, MBC and SBS, could be released around 15 to 20 minutes following the vote, with the first actual count expected around 7:30 p.m. That being said, in tight races, final results may not be clear until 3 or 4 in the morning, and counting could run longer than usual this cycle because of newly strengthened ballot verification procedures. Politically, this election carries significant weight because it is the first nationwide vote since President Lee Jae-myung took office. So beyond local governance, the results are also being viewed as an early measure of public sentiment towards the new administration.
Indeed, the election comes timely since it marks 1 year since the Lee Jae-myung administration began just exactly a year ago. Now, Hae-ryun, walk us through the early voting that wrapped up with a record high voter turnout. So what's the significance of the turnout?
So, right, let's take a look at the numbers. So the early voting rate came in at 23.51%, the highest ever recorded for a local election in Korea, with more than 10 million people casting ballots early for the first time. And regionally, turnout was the strongest in the traditionally liberal southwest, especially Jeollanam province at nearly 39%. Seoul recorded just under 24%, while Busan came in at around 21%. So both parties are claiming that this is good news for them. Speaking at a party leadership meeting Tuesday morning, Democratic Party floor leader Han Byung-do urged voters to back what he called the Lee administration's economic agenda.
For this June 3rd local election, we ask voters to support the Lee Jae-myung administration, a capable Democratic Party, and a major leap forward for the economy.
The People Power Party, meanwhile, argues the high turnout reflects growing frustration with President Lee and the ruling party, essentially a protest vote in disguise, and is making a strong push for younger voters ahead of Election Day. People Power Party floor leader Song Won-seok made a direct appeal to voters in their 20s and 30s.
Your vote can change your life, change the country, and shape the future. The People Power Party will stand behind and support young people.
But the reality is that neither side can be sure, because back in 2022, early turnout also topped 20%, yet the final turnout settled at just under 51%. The real deciding factor tomorrow will be how many moderate and metropolitan voters, especially in the Greater Seoul area, actually show up on Election Day.
Now, Hae-ryun, before I let you go, remind us the key races that everyone will be watching closely tomorrow.
So Seoul is the headline race. There's no question about that. The Democratic Party candidate Chung Won-ho and incumbent People Power Party Mayor Oh Se-hun are in a very tight contest. If Oh wins, he becomes the first 5-term Seoul mayor in history and keeps the momentum going for the current city administration. But if Chung pulls off a win, it would be the first time the Democratic Party controls Seoul City Hall in roughly a decade. The final stretch has been dominated by safety concerns, a rebar emission controversy on a GTX transit project, and a bridge collapse put infrastructure squarely in the spotlight. So both candidates are trying to own the safety issue while also drawing a clear contrast on housing. Chung is emphasizing public-led supply while always pushing private redevelopment. And Busan is the other major battleground where Democratic candidate Chun Jae-soo is challenging incumbent Park Hyung-jun. Both parties know that if they lose Busan, it will significantly shift the political balance heading into the next few years. So expect both party leaderships to be pulling out all the stops tonight in the final campaign pushes.
Indeed. A big day ahead of us tomorrow. Do keep us posted. Hae-ryun, I'll see you tomorrow.
Thanks for having me tonight.
The countdown to Election Day is nearly over, with polls across the country opening in just a few hours. Up next, we walk you through the essentials of tomorrow's local elections, including who can vote, what's at stake, and how to cast your ballot. Here's our Park Jun-han.
Coming exactly 1 year after the 2025 presidential election, the 9th nationwide local elections will be held across Korea on Wednesday. In most parts of the country, eligible voters aged 18 or older will be handed a total of 7 different colored ballots to elect positions, ranging from provincial governors to local council members. Voters in Sejong City and on Jeju Island, which operate under special administrative systems, will receive just 4 ballots. Some 150,000 foreign residents can vote. To qualify, foreign nationals must have held permanent residency for at least 3 years and be on their local foreigner registry. While early voting was available at any polling station nationwide, voting on election day works a bit differently. Voters must bring a valid ID card or mobile identification app and vote only at their designated polling station based on their resident registration address as of May 12th. Polling stations across the country will be open from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. To keep things organized, the voting process is split into 2 rounds. In the first round, voters receive 3 ballots, a white-colored ballot for metropolitan mayor or provincial governor. The light green ballot is to choose the superintendent of education, and the axial ballot is to elect the head of the local district, city, or county. In the second round, voters receive the remaining 4 ballots to select local council members. The light pink and sky gray ballots are used to elect local constituency council members at both the broader provincial and tighter district levels. Lastly, the sky blue and cream ballots are for proportional representation representatives. When voting, you must choose only 1 candidate or party per ballot. Marking 2 or more names or parties will instantly invalidate your vote.
Votes will be counted immediately once the polls close on June 3rd, ushering in a new 4-year term for local leaders, including the next mayor of Seoul. 박주단, Arirang News.
Consumer prices here in South Korea climbed back to the 3% range for the first time in 26 months, now driven largely by higher fuel costs and rising prices at the pump. Kim Do-yeon has more.
The situation in the Middle East is driving up global oil prices, pushing Korea's consumer inflation past the 3% threshold for the first time in over 2 years. According to the Ministry of Finance and Economy on Tuesday, consumer prices in May rose 3.1% on year. This marks an escalation from the 2.6% growth recorded in April, showing that inflationary pressures are rapidly gaining momentum. Petroleum prices served as the primary driver, surging 24.2% on year. Although retail prices saw a minor dip at the very end of May, the overall monthly average remained high, further compounded by a low base effect from last year.
You have to look at the monthly average. While prices did see a minor dip toward the end of May, inflation figures are calculated on an on-year basis, meaning the low base effect from last year's index was fully reflected this month.
This energy shock quickly cascaded into the service sector. Driven by strong seasonal demand over May's long weekends and surging fuel surcharges, overseas group travel costs jumped 26.3%, while domestic airfare rose 25.9%. The government noted that aggressive temporary interventions, including product price caps and tariff quotas, managed to shave 0.6 percentage points off headline inflation, which otherwise would have reached 3.7%. However, macro pressures are mounting as the prolonged high exchange rate threatens to feed directly into domestic consumer costs.
A high exchange rate naturally pushes up import prices. When import prices rise, they lead to an increase in producer prices, which can subsequently filter through to broader consumer prices.
Commenting on the latest data, the Bank of Korea noted that consumer inflation is highly likely to remain in the 3% range for the time being, adding that the central bank will maintain a vigilant stance on price stability. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
Samsung Electronics unveiled on Tuesday the first mock-up of its 8th generation high bandwidth memory, or HBM5, at COMPUTEX 2026 in Taiwan. To tackle overheating issues in advanced AI chips, the tech giant also introduced a core heat management technology called the heat path block. Samsung's chief technology officer Song Jae-hyuk emphasized that the company added a chimney-like structure to lower thermal resistance, giving the company a competitive edge as an integrated device manufacturer. Samsung also showcased its HBM4E wafer and chipset, which successfully operate at a maximum bandwidth of 4 terabytes per second, with plans to apply the world's first hybrid copper bonding technology. In other news, the U.S. and Iran are offering conflicting views on their standoff, with U.S. President Donald Trump voicing optimism for a deal within a week, while Tehran remains tight-lipped. And a renewed fighting between Israel and Hezbollah in Lebanon is also emerging as a hurdle. Kim Jun-hong has this report.
U.S. President Donald Trump says that a deal with Iran could be reached over the next week. Speaking to ABC News on Monday, Trump called a potential agreement even better than a military victory. On the same day, Iran's foreign ministry said Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi has spoken with key Pakistani mediators over ceasefire developments. Yet prospects remain uncertain amid tensions over Israel's attacks in Lebanon. Iran's semi-official Tasnim news agency reported earlier the same day that Iran has halted talks and exchanges of draft proposals with the U.S. through mediators in protest of Israel's attacks in Lebanon. Tehran blamed Washington for delays in ending the conflict, saying the U.S. bears responsibility for Israel's actions and warning that any truce violation could undermine the broader ceasefire.
We emphasized and still emphasize this point, that the ceasefire in Lebanon is an inseparable part of any ceasefire and any final agreement to end the war.
Trump said Israel and Hezbollah had agreed to dial back fighting after speaking with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and communicating with the Lebanese militant group through mediators. Trump announced the development after a reportedly tense call with Netanyahu, pressing Israel to scale back its offensive in Lebanon over concerns it could disrupt negotiations with Iran. He said no troops would be sent to Beirut and those already on their way had turned back. Netanyahu confirmed the talks but warned strikes could resume if Hezbollah continued operations. Meanwhile, tensions between Washington and Tehran remain unsolved beyond the Israel-Hezbollah issue. According to CNN, Trump sent back a draft MOU to Iran with tougher terms, seeking firm assurances from Tehran on its nuclear program and reopening the Strait of Hormuz. Adding to tensions, Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps said it struck a commercial vessel in Gulf waters in retaliation for what it called a U.S. attack on an Iranian ship. Kim Jun-hong, Arirang News.
On local election day tomorrow, highs will top 30 degrees Celsius across inland areas nationwide. Temperatures will be boosted by a fan effect, which occurs when air warms and dries as it descends mountain ranges. Southeasterly winds from Typhoon Changmi will help trigger this phenomenon. Even so, the air will remain fairly dry, keeping feels-like temperatures slightly lower than the actual temperature. Over waters, a typhoon warning remains in effect for the far eastern offshore waters of the South Sea. High seas warnings and advisories are in place for other offshore waters of the South Sea and waters around Jeju Island. Tomorrow will start off mostly sunny nationwide, with cloud cover increasing through the morning. Inland areas of Jeollado and Gyeongsang-namdo provinces could see brief showers later in the day. As for temperatures, Seoul will start the day at 21 degrees, Chuncheon at 18 degrees, and Daegu at 18 degrees as well. Then by the afternoon, Seoul will get up to 32 degrees, while Daegu will top out at 33 degrees, Gwangju at 30 degrees. Looking ahead, after scattered showers through Thursday, the heat will gradually ease later in the week. Now here's a look at the weather around the world.
That is all we have for tonight. I'm Kim Dami. From all of us here at Arirang, thanks for watching and good night.